Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, over the last few days, I've received numerous emails and calls from conservatives and Tea Party activists from across the country regarding immigration. Their opinions really matter to me, because they were with me 3 years ago when so many people here in Washington and in Florida, for that matter, thought I had no chance to win my election. Let me begin by saying these people are patriots. They're everyday Americans from all walks of life who are deeply concerned about the direction that our country is headed. And they're increasingly unhappy about the immigration reform proposal in the Senate. It's not because they're anti-immigrant, as some on the left like to say. It's not because they're closed-minded. They believe, as I do, that as a sovereign country, we have a right to secure our borders, that we have a right to have immigration laws and to enforce them. And they're increasingly opposed to this effort because for over 3 decades, and despite many promises to enforce the law, the federal government, under both Republicans and Democrats, have failed to do so. In the end, it isn't just immigration reform itself that worries them. It's that the government has failed them so many times before. They realize we have a legal immigration system that needs reform. They realize that we have over 11 million people currently living in our country illegally and that we have to deal with them. They just simply believe that no matter what law we pass, we cannot trust the federal government to ever actually enforce it. This sentiment was best summed up for me in an email that I received from Sharon Calvert, who's a prominent Tea Party leader in Tampa, Florida. Here's what she wrote. She said, "Today, June 2013, we're in a very different political climate than we were after the last election. We are in a political climate of distrust of government and elected representatives at its highest." She goes on to say, "Do we want to trust this administration to faithfully enforce a bill to the best interests of all Americans with a bill that so few have read?" End quote. She makes a powerful point. They're finding out that the IRS investigates people based on their political views, of all the questions that remain about Benghazi, and seeing the Justice Department target reporters. Trust in the federal government is rightfully at an all-time low. I share the skepticism about this administration and Washington in general. In just the 2 years that I've been here, I have seen the games that are played and the promises that are broken, and how the American people ultimately suffer the consequences. And that's exactly what led me to get involved in this issue in the first place. We have a badly broken legal immigration system. Not only one that does not work, it actually encourages illegal immigration. We have a border with Mexico that, despite billions of dollars that have already been spent, it's still not secure. Every day, people, and drugs, and guns are trafficked across the border. And we have 11 million people living in this country illegally in de facto amnesty. What I'm describing, this is the way things are now. This is the status quo. And it is a terrible mess. It is hurting our country terribly. And unless we do something about it, this administration isn't going to fix it. Now, political pundits, they love to focus on the politics of all this. But for me, this isn't about catering to any group for political gain. Predictably, despite all the work that we've done on immigration reform, some so-called pro-immigrant groups continue to protest me daily. This isn't about winning points from the establishment or the mainstream media either, by the way. No matter how consistent I have been in focusing on the border security aspects of reform, whenever I've spoken about it, the Beltway media has accused me of trying to undermine or walk away from this reform. This isn't about becoming a Washington dealmaker. Truthfully, it would have been a lot easier to just sit back, vote against any proposal, and give speeches about how I would have done it differently. And finally, this certainly isn't about gaining support for future office. Many conservative commentators and leaders, people who I deeply respect, and with whom I agree on virtually every other issue, are disappointed about my involvement in this debate. I got involved in this issue for one simple reason. I ran for office to try and fix things that are hurting this special country. And in the end, that's what this is about for me. Trying to fix a serious problem that faces America. The proposal before the Senate is by no means perfect. Like any proposal that will come before the Senate, it has flaws. But it also has important reforms that conservatives have been trying to get for years. For example, it changes our legal immigration system from a predominantly family-based system of chain migration to a merit-based system that focuses on job skills This proposal mandates the most ambitious border and interior security measures in our nation's history. For example, it requires and funds the completion of 700 miles of Rio border fence. It adds 20,000 new border agents. It details a specific technology plan for each sector of the border. It requires E-Verify for every employer in America, and it creates a tracking system to identify people who overstay their visas. These are all things that, at a minimum, must happen before those in the country illegally can apply for permanent status. And the proposal deals with those who are here illegally in a reasonable but responsible way. Right now, those here illegally are living in de facto amnesty. This is what I mean by that. They're unregistered, many pay no taxes, and few will ever have to pay a price for having violated our laws. Under this bill, they will have to come forward. They will have to pass background checks. They will have to pay a fine. They will have to start paying taxes. And they will be ineligible for welfare, for food stamps, and for Obamacare. And in return, the only thing they get is a temporary work permit. And they can't renew it in 6 years unless they can prove that they've been holding a job and paying their taxes. For at least 10 years, that's all they can have. And after that, after all that, they can't even apply for permanent status until the fence is built, the Border Patrol agents are hired, and the border security technology, E-Verify, and the tracking system are fully in place. Yet despite all these measures, opposition from many conservatives has grown significantly in the last few weeks. Why? Well, because they've heard that the Secretary of Homeland Security can just ignore the border requirement. But this is not true. The department does have the discretion on where to build the fence, but not on the amount of fencing it must build. At the end of the day, it is simple. 700 miles of pedestrian fencing must be built. They've also heard that the Secretary of Homeland Security can just waive the radars and the drones and the ground sensors and the other technology required in the bill. But that's just not true. The Secretary can always add more to the plan, but the list of border security measures we mandate in the legislation is the minimum that must be implemented. Some oppose it because they've heard that a future Congress can just defund all the security measures, like they've done in the past. But that's just not true. The money is built into the bill. Unlike previous border security laws, it doesn't leave it dependent on future funding. They also oppose the bill because they've heard that it creates a taxpayer subsidy for people to buy a car or a scooter. That's just not true. Nothing in this bill allows that. And finally, they oppose the bill because they've heard that last Friday, a brand new 1,100-page bill that no one has read is what now is before the Senate. That's just not true. This is the exact same bill that's been publicly available for 10 weeks. The main addition to it are about 120 pages of border security. Because in order to add 700 miles of fence, 20,000 border agents, and a prohibition on things like foreign students or tourists from getting Obamacare, we had to add pages to the bill. Now, I understand, I do, why after reading these false claims, people would be opposed to this bill. And I understand why after we've been burned by large bills in the past, people are suspicious of big reforms of any kind. And I understand why after promises made in the past on immigration that have not been kept, people doubt whether they'll ever be kept again in the future. But I also understand what's going to happen if at some point we do not come up with an agreement we can support on immigration reform. What's going to happen is we'll still have a broken legal immigration system. We won't have more Border Patrol officers. We won't have enough fencing. We still won't have mandatory E-Verify. And we'll still have 11 million people living here illegally. And that's why I'm involved in this. Because despite all the problems we have with government, the only way to mandate a fence, E-Verify, and more agents is to pass a law that does so. Now, I knew getting these requirements into the bill would not be easy. This administration insisted the border is already secure, and they fought every effort to improve the border security parts of this bill. The administration wants the fastest and easiest path to citizenship possible, and they fought every condition and every trigger in this bill. But I got involved because I knew that if conservatives didn't get involved in shaping this proposal, it would not have any of the border security reforms that our nation desperately needs. Getting to this point has been very difficult. to hear the worry and the anxiety and the growing anger, and the voices of so many people who helped me get elected to the Senate, who I agree with on virtually every other issue. It's been a real trial for me. I know they love America, and they're deeply worried about the direction that this administration is trying to take our country. But when I was a candidate, I told you I wanted to come here and fight. I wanted to fight to protect what's good for America and fight to stop what's bad for America. And I believe what we have now on immigration is hurting our country badly, and I simply wasn't going to just leave it to Democrats alone to figure out how to fix it. I guess perhaps at the heart of my support of this proposal is that I know firsthand that while immigrants have always impacted America, America changes immigrants even more. Just a generation ago, my parents lived in poverty in another country. But America changed them. It gave them a chance to improve their lives. It gave them the opportunity to open doors for me that were closed for them. And the longer they lived here, the older their kids got, the more conservative they became. The more convinced they became that limited government and free enterprise and our constitutional liberties made this nation special. I am a first-hand witness to the transformative power of our country. How it doesn't just change people's pocketbooks. It changes their hearts and their minds. And despite all the challenges and despite our broken government, I still believe this is that kind of country. And I realize that in the end, many of my fellow conservatives will not be able to support this reform. But I hope you will understand that I honestly believe that it's the right thing to do for this country. To finally have an immigration system that works. To finally have a fence. To finally have more agents and E-Verify. And to finally put an end to de facto amnesty. In my heart and in my mind, I know that we must solve this problem once and for all, or it will only get worse, and it will only get harder to solve. To my fellow conservatives, I will continue to fight alongside you for real tax reform, for lowering our debt, for balancing our budget, for reducing regulations, for rolling back job-killing environmental policies, and for repealing the disaster of Obamacare. To my fellow conservatives, I will continue to fight alongside you for the sanctity of life and for traditional marriage. But I will also continue to work in the hopes of one day uniting behind a common conservative strategy on how to fix our broken immigration system once and for all. I yield the floor.